Good day to you from Anagalactic on Sunday, July 12th, 2026. We have some special effects here. In the background, we have a hawk. She'll be squawking the whole time, if all goes well. Then I tell you the secrets of the universe. That's what this station is. You'll see a bullseye right there in the center. Looks like a clock face with an arrow that goes around and around, and it traces out that spiral. That is the flight of a photon. This is from Wikipedia. That is an animated GIF. Really kind of magical because it has motion in it. There are two motions that you'll see, one of which is linear forward. There's the hawk. I can't close the door because it's going to be 112 degrees today. Perhaps a little less, we hope. But this is the high desert, actually the lowest sinkhole. It's a North American plains left by the flood. This is on the other side of the Great Western Plateau, between the Rockies and the Sierra Nevada. I'm north of the beautiful Sierra Nevada, in the rather ugly Lassen Shasta region, although Shasta is a stratovolcano. Now what we're going to do here is really put you over the line so no one will ever understand you again, because you'll have the secrets of the universe. And where does that begin? Well, we're talking about physics. So we're not talking about the origin of humans or the ecology. That would be biology. And we're not talking about the origin of the Earth, such as it looks today. That would be the province of geology. If you don't know those, you're not even a scientist, you're not even a real man. So I assume you have learned the secrets of geology and of biology, so that you know the origins of yourself and your immediate environment. Because if you don't know that, you don't know anything. And this will not help you. Well, it might help you in your personal life to get along with others. No, it won't. It's going to estrange you from everybody you've ever known. The animated GIF is not really perfectly displayed on a computer screen. You can see it halts, and there it goes again. A photon does not do that. And we're going to be talking about the flight of the photon, which is my favorite topic because it leads to the solution to the collapse of the wave function if it's studied using spherical geometry, which I discovered. All of that is to bring you up to speed if you haven't seen the 1,000 videos that I've produced thus far, which I'm sure you haven't because nobody has. I'm very unpopular, and you will be too, so welcome to your new world of estrangement, ostracism. You'll not be understood, that'll drive you insane, and finally you'll lash out and probably be crushed by the combine. But if you live alone, as I do, you're relatively safe, not from yourself. Although I did give up beer, and it's been close to a month now since I had my last beer. That's why I sound angry. That's why I sound just a little bit off-kilter. It's because I'm frustrated beyond belief. But that's part of life. I wear these dark glasses so you can't see how
angry my eyes are.
Okay, so I'm going to control myself, and the hawk is going to remind me that everything is transient. There are interruptions. This will ultimately mean nothing to you. It already means nothing to me. And again, science is meaningless. You need to know what's going to happen to you after you die, don't you? Well, you don't want to, and so you won't. And that's the end of the story, for you, for me, for everybody. We're just wanderers, we're passing through. This is a big game. If you live 70 years, you cross the finish line. If you make it to the 80s, that's a little extra, but you're finite. As one great scholar once put it to me, and I never forget this kind of stuff. I always remember wisdom when I hear it. It's like the only thing I have going for me is I just am incapable of forgetting a bit of wisdom. What a human life is a flash of lightning between two infinities. Actually, he said eternities, which is the temporal version of infinity. Eternity is time infinity. Does that exist? Of course it exists. You just said it. So it exists in your mind. And this is the cutting edge of science now, both in quantum mechanics and in cosmology. Cosmology is always wrong. It will always be a wrong theory because the idea behind cosmology is to define the universe in some way. That can be done, but it can't be done with cosmology. It can only be done with quantum mechanics. As far as quantum mechanics goes, which is what you're looking at, it has to do with a continuous function. Your physicists don't know that. They don't understand what continuity is. They didn't do their lessons. Your physicists are all retards. I'm authorized to say that because I'm the one wearing the dark glasses. By the way, this is a double Windsor knot with a half gainer and a hint of mint. That's very, very rare, even in Europe, even in merry old bitch England. And I wear a double Windsor knot. That's not good enough for the likes of me. I have to be absolutely unique. So it's a double Windsor knot with a half gainer and a hint of mint. And it took me 8 months to learn how to tie this knot. It's almost impossible for me because, first of all, I'm dyslexic. Second of all, I have arthritis. And third of all, I'm looking in a reflection where everything is ass backwards or face backwards. I just can't do it. Like whenever I say the
photon goes for...
God damn it, I actually did it right that time. Usually I say time goes... I was going to say backward, but I did it right again. Anyway, I guess everything flipped. If you wear glasses, this was done, and you go to sleep with these glasses on where everything is actually upside down. Well, the first morning, everything is upside down. And you go through the whole day just not being oriented. After 2 to 3 days, you wake up and everything is right side up again. Your mind will correct that. Well, this is exactly what you need to do in order to see into physical imaginary space. You can see it in this diagram. So take a good look and see if you can see it. Where is physical imaginary space there? Can you see it? Well, yes, you can, but you may not see it. You're seeing it with your eyes, but you're not seeing it with your mind. The physical imaginary space is that circle. That does not exist in space. Although you can imagine that it does exist in space because it wouldn't even be real if it didn't exist in space, since space contains everything. Yes, space contains everything, including contraspace. And that's what we can't see. Now, there have been some geniuses such as Lori, I forgot your last name, but she's called Fractal Woman. And if you want to hear someone who's just the most dreary person you've ever heard speak, she's a hands-on physicist. And she is just about intolerable to listen to. I've listened to maybe 24 of her videos because she's a genius. She has corrected Wikipedia at least twice. And what she says about contraspace is well worth your attention. I very strongly recommend, if you've never heard Lori, whatever her name is, Lori Fractal Woman. It's Fractal Woman is the name of her channel. And she talks about contraspace. And she got a lot of this from a crazy man, a magnetist, an alchemist, who lives somewhere in Tennessee or some ungodly place. And he's independently wealthy, but that doesn't stop him from begging for money. And his name, it slips my mind, which is probably good because I would not give him a very favorable review, although he's a genius. And he's the only man probably on earth who understands magnetism. But since he's a pompous ass and he's overeducated, he knows like everything there is to know about ancient religions, except on the occult side. He doesn't care a shit about God. All he cares about is just being weird. So these kind of people attract me, just dry as death bones women, and just wild-eyed, bald, covered with tattoos alchemists. A magnetist in the worst sense. These men used to be captured and burned at the stake. But today, I'm just mercifully, for his sake, forgetting his name, but I'd love to pillory him by name, because I hate him. I love him, and it's a love-hate thing. It's really weird at the cutting edge of science, because we're all dying to get the answers. Lori can't quite get the answer. And Ken Wheeler. Lori, oh shit, I almost had it. Anyway, I could find out real fast. Okay, it's Lori Gardi, Gardi. She is not what you would call a beauty queen, but she has a mind like a very sharp laser, and this is her alter ego. I don't know if she's, I mean, that is a very nice looking young girl, but that's her alter ego, and I think I should just leave it at that. Lori is as dry as stale toast, but she can correct Wikipedia, and that gets high marks in my book. And this, as the hawk is desisted in favor of the helicopter flying overhead, that, as you probably can guess, is Ken Wheeler, the magnetist. Look at those tattoos. He has tattoos all over his hands. He has tattoos apparently all over his body. That's actually the first time I've seen his clavicle region. But this man is more tattooed than a UFC fighter. And yet he's got a mind like a sharp laser. I think I'm going to keep that metaphor. I really admire this man. I really admire Lori. Anybody that I really love and admire, I just mercilessly run down. Because, of course, this is a competition. And neither of these two, male or female, is going to outdo me. I have consulted them both. I've absorbed everything that they know in order to use it for myself. Science is dog eat rat, honey. You just take everything you can because it's free. It's not even theft. This guy broadcasts, well, I've just taken it all in. I've had extensive interaction with Ken Wheeler. He's extremely remote and private. And finally, he just told me, you're from the outside world, and I don't do binneth with men I don't do binneth with, which is nobody. Right now, he's in Key West, as I just learned, just having a good time down in Key West, which, by the way, I hope he's underneath a mosquito net, because Key West, you'll be eaten alive by mosquitoes. My poor younger sister took her honeymoon in Key West, and when they got out of the car to go into their honeymoon nest, they almost didn't make it inside because they were immediately attacked by a horde of bloodthirsty mosquitoes, and when they got it, they never slept. The place was just, they came in through the cracks in the walls, apparently, and just ate them alive all night. And in the morning, with their bloodshot eyes, just covered with welts, they ran to the car, trying to protect each other, got into the car while mosquitoes were just filling their eyeballs, and they sped off and somehow got up to Miami and survived. So anyway, that's where Ken Wheeler is. Maybe the mosquitoes won't land on a magnetist. Maybe he mastered magnetism so well, that he could just drive even insects away. Anyway, I read his book, although it's actually unreadable. I don't recommend that. I retypeset it because he, like many crazy people, I mean that, of course, in an ambiguous way, he'll have sentences, actually lines, the way you lay out typography. He has a book on magnetism, which is actually probably the cutting edge. It's just that you have to speak the language of angels and demons in order to read it. It's just filled with all of these crazy images, they're real. They're like photographs, but of magnetic things. It's just festooned. It's like an encyclopedia written by crazy people in some nut ward. And the lines are about 50 words long. And there's no way to condense it because he typeset it that way. So you have to read across a line, which actually comprises at least 3 sentences before it skips over to the next line, and that will wear you out really fast. So I turned it into text and I recast it without the goddamned images, so that's the second advantage. And I contacted him, told him that I could send this to him if he would like, so that his book can be understood, because it's absolutely unreadable the way it is. And so he responded, I don't accept anything from the outside world. And he was really put offish, and I really grew to hate him And to this day, and I stopped watching his channel this about 3 years ago. It is one of the scientists that I reached out to, like Dr. Alexander Unsicker. I also reached out to Lori Gardy. I gave her a compliment and I told her a little bit about my work, just a sentence or two, to see if she'd bite. She said, "Thank you so much for the compliment," and that was it. I don't ask twice. I will not ask twice. Dr. Unsicker, he did respond. It was not even, none of these ever got to email. It was always a comment on one of their videos, which is all they care about. And they don't care about me or anybody else unless it's to make money. And all these people that I've contacted, they're not the only ones. Dr. Unsicker, Lori Gardy, Ken Wheeler. There have been others. I even reached out to Kurt Mungle, probably the best science presenter on the circuit today, although he's kind of sold out, because they all want money, and that's all they want. Well, that will interfere with your science. It doesn't interfere with me. I have no money. There's no point in me asking for money. The universe has already decided you will have just barely enough money to live from month to month, only not quite. And that's where I'm at. That's why you see my hair is completely pasted back. If you look in the back, you see how long it is. I don't know if you can see that. I haven't had a haircut in 2 years because I can't afford it. You may ask, well, how can I afford a tie and a gold chain? I got this gold chain from a homeless person, which, by the way, is very rude. I really don't like it when people say a homeless person, and nobody's ever come up with some synonymous phrase or word or term for that. I really hate that term because homeless person, you're degrading them. You're inhumanizing them. I started to say hobo. Every fucker that I've ever said hobo in their hearing, they immediately correct me. Oh no. Because it's like one of the only facts they know of social science is that hobos lived on trains in the 1930s. That's the only definition of hobo. So oh, I'm not allowed to say hobo. Well, I have a new one. It's a member of the unlanded gentry. In England, all the scientists, including Sir Isaac Newton, and really all of them, certainly Charles Darwin, was one of the landed gentry. And Darwin, that's the only reason he became famous, because two men discovered natural selection before Darwin did, and both of them published before Darwin. But one of them, published anonymously, became wildly famous, but his name was Chambers. He was a Scotsman, and he published everything that's in Darwin's book that has to do with the theory of, really, speciation. Speciation is at least 30 years older than Darwin, but you see, Darwin was a member of the landed gentry. And in England, that means he's a real person. Everyone else is just a serf. And it's still true in England to this day. And England, I am told on very good authority, is about to undergo a civil war. England is so corrupt and has been so corrupt for decades. It's so evil. It's so communist. It's so worse than communism that the people have to rise up and start slitting each other's throats. And that's probably going to happen. And if it doesn't, then Russia is going to have to nuke the country. And that's coming up within 2 summers. So we have quite a bit of world politics on the scene. I'm sorry, give me just a mo here. I'm sure Ken is having a good time in Key West. This is only 1 day ago. His channel is called Theoria Apophasis, which I'm sure I mispronounced, and he'd correct me immediately. Oh no, it's Theoria Apophasis. And then I'd have to be, oh, your worshipfulness, let me kiss your tattoos. No, I'm not sure about him either. He never talks about ladies. There's no ladies in his life. I have no idea. I don't care. But really, you kind of have to care these days. And so I'm just going to change that image. I don't think I put it on. Okay, so in a thematic sequence, you could just say that this is the universe being tattooed with light. And we know that space is real because this stuff passes through space. So space is the ether. And science doesn't say that, just totally overlooked. That's what ether is. It's space. Is it a substance? You can't say that. No, it has no substance to it, and can it bend? All the space-time artists say that time-space bends. No, it doesn't, because space doesn't bend. That's ridiculous. That's anti-physical to say that. They say it because of the mathematics, that you can conceptualize space as having been bent by something, and that would be gravity, which, as you know, is due to the protons. That's tautological. Nobody would argue with that, but nobody actually says that out loud. Because if the physicists actually would just say things simply and listen to what they're saying, what you would have to say is the weight of matter is due to the protons because of the atomic number, which indicates the number of protons. You would have to have a footnote, and neutrons in the nucleus of any atom has they're protons, but some of them are in the neutronic state. But they're all protons and they're all identical throughout the universe. Well, that's the quantum of gravity. So that's the answer to quantum gravity as a theory. You now know what the quantum of gravity is. It's the proton, which is the only spatial particle. Now, the photon, which you can see here in diagrammatic form, it's being stretched linearly. But that's a sphere, and it's a sphere that's expanding in space. Now, it doesn't show that. It shows it as a tube, because this is polarized light. So that is actually circularly polarized light, and you can find this animated GIF in the Wikipedia article on electromagnetic radiation. So that's where this diagram is taken from. But the key to this diagram, which of course is not in Wikipedia because this would be the answer, is that bullseye. See that bullseye? That is called a closed object on the plane. It's called a circle. And that takes the place of the Euclidean line because it's closed. The Euclidean line is open, which means it goes to two polar infinities. And if you want to axiomatize the plane, which is how we see physiologically, we see a plane. Well, since we see linearly, we naturally compose the plane with two lines. And that's called a lot of things, but that's called the parameterization of the plane with systematic linearization, where you take not just one line, which is a dimension, but two lines, which makes a grid. And that's called XY space. It's technically called Cartesian space, whatever. But Euclid did not use that. What he used was simply straight line geometry, from which was derived the number system which we now use, which took centuries to perfect. There was no zero in Euclid's day, and they had no idea, no conception of negative numbers. So all they knew about in terms of the line was a ray, because that's how you make distance. Now, to make distance, which is called linear spatial separation, straight line distance, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. That was challenged in the 19th century with Lobachevsky in space and Bolyai in space, which is inaccurately called non-Euclidean geometry. That's not true. It's Euclidean without the parallel postulate, whereby two straight lines can be said to be parallel, but that's a really difficult thing to prove. And nobody ever proved it, but finally somebody disproved it. His name was Lobachevsky, around 1830, and Bolyai. Lobachevsky lived in central Russia, and Bolyai Janusz, he lived in Transylvania, oh my God, where he is now a hero and worshipped. Well, a hero. I'm not sure the Romanians are that superstitious as to worship either Bolyai or Dracula, if you see what I'm saying. They're actually beautiful people, and I'm in love with a Romanian lady here. And I even said to her, and I went out on a limb to stretch myself to tell her I really like her, I said, and I just left it as a dangling sentence, if only I were 40 years younger. She got the message. I actually got a hug. And that's good enough for an old man. That keeps me going. I live alone. I have lived alone for 18 years since my beloved Ukrainian princess died. And we were only married for 8 years. Unfortunately, she contracted incurable cancer and died at 28. And if you do the math, yes, I met her when she was 18, and I was a dirty, old 42-year-old missionary to Ukraine. So I ended up marrying my own translator because she's the most beautiful girl in the world, as all the Slavic girls insisted. She was stopped on the street here in America dozens of times by men and women who just were stunned with her beauty and just wanted to know if she was a model. Finally, she got so many of these compliments, which are kind of, cute, a little bit embarrassing, but it's meant well. They're just in awe. Well, she's dead now, so I won't go into detail, but that's why I live alone. I don't give a fuck about this world. I certainly don't care about you. But I do care about science, because it leads to a proof of God, which not even Leibniz or anybody could ever formulate. Nobody's ever proved the existence of God. I did. So that's why I keep going. 1,500 videos that nobody will ever watch. Nobody gives a shit about me. The feeling is mutual, okay? But I still dress nicely. I try to keep my hair pinned back. If my eyes are in bad shape, I'm always looking angry. I'm just an angry old fart. I wear these so you think I'm cool. Maybe I look more like the Fonz, yeah? Well, I'm... I don't know. I actually can't see anything right now, but I don't need to. And I think blind people can see the geometry that I discovered better than people who are born with vision. Because you do have a visual perceptual system, whether your eyeballs work or not. But that's just a theory, and I don't have enough time to get into that, because I'm going to die pretty soon. And don't worry about it, you're going to die too. You'll probably die before I do, the way things are going in this world, but I'm not covering that right now. What I want to show you is physical imaginary space, which involves the concept of infinity, of course. So what you see there is a closed line called a circle. Now you know that the planets go in distorted circles called ellipses. And all that means is that instead of having a single focus, it has two foci. And the more you stretch the two foci apart, the more acute becomes the ellipse. What if you go to infinity? Well, Kepler tried this, and then Newton tried it, and then Bošković tried it, and they all got the same result. You discover continuity, but it was only Bošković who turned it into a theoretical framework, which is so in advance of modern Einsteinian physics that it is, as the old phrase goes, not even funny. What I was able to do in 2022, without having even heard of the name Bošković, perhaps I had heard the name, but I knew nothing of his work. Well, I know everything about his work now. I read his book and some other stuff, too. That man's name is coming back up in cutting-edge physics in Europe. The Americans are way behind because they would not listen to Augustus Prince. Augustus Prince was the United States' very first black radio man. I don't make this stuff up, okay? That's true. But he was also a nuclear physicist. And he became an astute researcher of Boškovician physics while he was working on bombs for the United States. I'm sorry, but that's what you have to do. And he did. I don't know if he sold his soul or not. That's not up to me to decide. I would have to say prima facie, yeah, he probably sold his soul to the devil. But I don't know that. I don't really know that of any man unless he says that he's an atheist, in which case closed, he's going to hell. But that's not what people should ever say. A scientist would never say that. So a guy like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins, who's not even a scientist, he's just a goofball. But Sam Harris has some credentials, and he says that he's an atheist, and he's proud of it. And he's proud to be called one of the 4 horsemen of new atheism. Unbelievable. I know the names of the other 3 men. You could look them up. But these guys are proud of being atheists. Well, that means that you're out of science. You're never going to be taken seriously by a rational man ever again for all eternity, because atheists never change their minds. Once you say out loud that you don't believe in God, just fuck God, fuck religion, fuck anything supernatural, you're out of science forever. But he makes a shitload of money because Americans are so stupid. Now, I'm trying to appeal to a much higher... There's the hawk. The hawk really calms me down. It reminds me, you could be interrupted at any time by a nuclear weapon, Scott. So just make sure that you remember you're just about to face God any nanosecond, and the hawk reminds me of that. I'm not even going to try to imitate her sound, because I don't do imitations very well. No, what you're looking at there, you can see there's several ways you can extrapolate that circle. First of all, it's not a real circle. If it were, it would be a sphere. And actually that brings us to our topic at hand. Is the photon a particle? I always said that it can't be because it was proved even before Newton that the propagation of light in free space has to be as a wave. And that was proved by Christian Huygens. Interesting that his first name is Christian. In those days, all the scientists were Christian. They're all white, and of course it was probably Anglican Christianity, so it doesn't really count. But they believed in God. No scientist today believes in God. That is called a sea change. Quite an interesting little phrase. But going from all Christian, they were all Christians. Now none of them are. You could say that's good because it was satanic Christianity, but you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater when you throw out God. Because now you're not a scientist, you're not even rational. In fact, you're not even human. And I can prove that. So you're listening to the right guy in terms of monotheism. I'm a strict monotheist, I'm actually Islam. Which is what you are if you're a monotheist. You may also be Christian. Actually, if you check it out really closely, as I, of course, do, that's my whole commission, Islam is Christianity. And Christianity is Islam. They're the same thing. And that has not gone unnoticed, but you don't hear it discussed much, because nobody, at least in America or England or Europe, gives a living fuck about religion, God, the Bible, Jesus, Muhammad, or anybody. The only ones who care about religion are politicians, in order to destroy the people of God, which, as you now know, are the Islam people. So that's why the white supremacist race of Europe and America, and now Israel, the brand new bud of white supremacist Europe, is implanted in the belly of Asia in order to destroy the true people of God. True Israel is, of course, no longer Israel. God hates Israel. But God loves Islam because he always has children. And that's actually in the New Testament. The promise of the Paraclete is interpreted in Islam as the promise of Yeshua, whom they call Isa. Oh, there's some more! We're in luck. That's what I get to deal with. It's 100 degrees, so I have to have the door open. Well, you get to hear every freaking noise that I get to listen to. You would still be able to hear that even if the door were shut, but it would be a fraction of the decibel level. In any event, always admit life into your science. If you're interrupted in your science, you're not being interrupted. You're interrupting life with your goddamn science. I hate science for that reason. Of course, I do it correctly, but I still stop for life. And there's the hawk, who of course stopped because I stopped talking. That hawk prefers to screech while I'm talking, especially if I'm making a very difficult and important point. That's when she raises her voice to the max. I'm not going to try to do it. But anyway, I think you understand that you're looking at a sphere that's propagating in space. Now, if this were... Isn't that beautiful? If your girlfriend interrupts you in science, she's not interrupting you. Give her full attention, drop everything you're doing, and fuck science. I think you understand the word fuck there could be translated over to her, you know? Why are you with her? Give her some attention, for fuck's sake. I think you could take that to heart. That's pretty good advice. Almost literal. Anyway, now if it's your mother, that's different, but you still interrupt science for... It's your cat! Your cat needs you! What are you going to do? Hey, leave me alone! I'm doing science! You're probably not, okay? Don't kid yourself. I'm doing science. So if this were to be drawn in 4D, which it would have to be, it would be an expanding spiral, a spherical spiral, which is very difficult to cram into an animated GIF. But this is tubularized, because that's actually polarized light. So that's a single photon that's actually traveling in a straight line. And so you're actually seeing the guts of the photon inside that tube. Now it's a spiral, which if you portray it in a 2D graph is a sine wave. And that's how you're always taught light, is a sine wave. Well, that sine wave is always a circle. It's a circle that you take because it's not the circle, it's the motion on the circle. And if you stretch it, it ends up going like this in a sine wave. But all that is a linearized circle. Now what you would have to do in order to see the flight of the photon in free space is do the same thing, but spherically. And that's how you're going to be able to see the collapse of the wave function. Let me show that to you so you not only know what the quantum of gravity is, which is the proton, but you'll be able to solve the collapse of the wave function, which is anti-gravity. Except it's not polar opposite. It's not because anti-gravity would be, oh, I can lift up off the ground like a Jetson, and now I'm just cruising like an angel. I can leave gravity because I have anti-gravity. That's polar opposite. That's not what is meant. It's conjugal opposite. So you go into a perpendicular universe. You've heard of a parallel universe? That does not exist. But what does exist is the perpendicular universe, which I'm now going to show you, because that's the space in which you can see the collapse of the wave function. The collapse of the wave function has 3 erroneous words in it: collapse, function, and wave. The photon correctly perceived, which is in what would be called 4D space, but that's D space, so that's extrinsic, that's incorrect. I've reformulated 4D space into its intrinsic form, which is spheric form, which is doubly conjugal, so it does have 4 components. Because closed space on the plane is the circle. You can see it's closed, and so it needs 2 numbers to parameterize the circle. I discovered that. And so when you translate that to volume space, it's 2 perpendicular circles, but that doesn't make sense because now all you have is 2 perpendicular circles. That doesn't make sense unless one of them is moving, and one of them is. But the equator is not moving, and that's the clock face here. This circle is one of the 2 perpendicular circles, and it has no motion on it. But you see that arrow going around, that's in perpendicular space. And that's pure motion, and that's not spatial. And that's the perpendicular space to space. And what exists in space is position. But what exists in perpendicular space is non-spatial and does not have a position. It has another data type, which no scientist has ever been able to formulate. I formulated it. And that's where you find time. And that's why it looks like a clock face, because a clock incorporates motion. And motion is essentially the non-spatial dimension of the universe. But we don't call it motion because that's abstract. And we shouldn't call it time because that's also abstract. And so the other dimension, which is perpendicular to space, as Einstein proved, there is a space that's perpendicular to space. But he got the derivative solution, and so he applied time to that dimension. And that works because the derivative retains the perpendicularity. But it's actually spheric perpendicularity, which I discovered. And that's true non-Euclidean space, because the circle is non-Euclidean. And that's why you've never seen a geometry of the circle or the sphere. It's never been discovered. I discovered it. It's in 2-component space. And those are both linear components. So we retain computability. And now we don't need the complex numbers, because we've captured what the complex numbers partially capture, which is the circular parameterization. The train! The train, boss, the train! Shut up, Tattoo. It is the plane we are waiting for. Oh, I'm sorry, boss. It's just the train. On Love Island or Fantasy Boat, one of the two. Very bad shows. But Ricardo Montalban, I watched it just to hear his voice. Ricardo Montalban, Captain, space is cold. Anyway, I love Ricardo Montalban. He broke his back in the 1950s filming a Western. Just broke his back in half. And yet, the guy, he played Khan, a physical specimen. Well, if you notice, he doesn't do a lot of bending when he's in that Star Trek adventure. But he gets this great line. Captain. I'm trying to remember it. Give me a mo. I got to put this on pause to remember. Captain. Vengeance is a dish best served cold. Captain. Space is cold. Ricardo Montalban, thank you very much. All right. So what you see there is another dimension that's not parallel. It's not a parallel universe. It's a perpendicular universe. I discovered this. That is called physical imaginary space. It has to be imaginary because there's no positionality in the space. However, it is geometric, and I'm going to show you the collapse of the wave function. So as a photon detaches from an electronic system, actually an electron shell, it detaches in quantized form. That has been proved. It's actually a continuous transformation. It would have to be, because it doesn't just go pop. That's called the quantum jump. That does not happen, but your linear mathematics forces it to happen. That's the quantum jump. That's also the secret to entanglement, and I'll show that to you in a moment, because the secret to entanglement, according to Paul-Édouard Maurice Dirac, is found if you can solve the collapse of the wave function, you'll be able to explain entanglement. And he tried, and he even developed hypercomplexity, a four-component version of the complex plane. That did not solve it. Indeed, as Albert Einstein's hypercalculus for four-component space did not solve for gravity and space-time as the result. But you see, because it's a linear derivative solution, it works. And so Paul Dirac actually made a major discovery, a prediction which came true. He was the first man to predict that there would be a contraparticle in contraspace, and he called it the positron. I don't think he actually called it that. It was named by somebody else, but he predicted the discovery of the anti-electron, which is an imaginary particle. And it would have to be, because if it actually existed, it would cancel an electron, which violates the conservation of energy. So there's no actual such particle as the positron, it was claimed within just a few years of Dirac's prediction of the positron, which he did not name, but that's what it ended up being called. He predicted that it had to exist in negative space, which is polar negative space, which does not exist. I discovered what Paul thought he discovered, and which was substantiated with the discovery of the particle that he predicted, except it's not a particle. It's called a positron, and it is said to have been discovered. No, it hasn't. It's simply a mathematization of a subparticle, which is all the standard model of subparticle physics has been able to do, is manipulate numbers to explain funny spirals in a bubble chamber in a cyclotron, which today is called a hadron collider. All of that is military. It's owned by the government. It's funded by the United States, about $1 trillion a year. Currently, underneath the soil of beautiful Switzerland, underneath the Alps, actually partially under Lake Geneva, they're building, right now as I speak, they're building another hadron collider that's about 10 times as big as the old one. It's going to take years to complete. It's $1 trillion, but they have to do it because they have to get this weapon in time for Satan to arrive. And that's what's going on in geopolitics right now, is the nations are all forming up. That is, the white nations. They're forming into one nation. And currently Europe is kind of cut off because they're so retarded. But England, if it doesn't undergo a civil war, is going to attack Russia. They just swore to it on God's holy Bible that they're going to wipe Russia off the map, or Russia's going to have to wipe them off the map. And Germany has gone Nazi now. They're back to Nazism. They have sworn to destroy Russia or die trying. And now the entire European Union, which is 10 countries, which matches something, I'll just say, in a certain writing, a certain holy scripture, where there are 10 nations that'll lie at the end for Armageddon. I'll just say that's coming true, but you don't have to credit that, because I know you hate the Bible, but I hope you don't hate God, or anything associated with God's divinity, such as perhaps his son, or his last prophet, Muhammad. If you're against that, you're going to hell and nothing can stop it. You're already dead, as it's said in The Matrix. When Trinity was kicking the shit out of all the John Smiths in that room, and she's running across the ceiling and just kicking their asses, the John Smiths, or whatever, Joe Smiths, because they're cyborgians in a fantasy world. But anyway, Trinity was kicking their asses and just kicking them left and right with kung fu, and is all cyber, so it's great. And, she's dressed in black leather. Trinity is a hot dish. And she's the one who saves Neo's life. Don't forget it was love that brought Neo back from death. So that's a good movie. And you're in the Matrix, so it's really good, but it's deadly. You need the red pill, that's why I'm here. This little tube up here you'll see is actually the red pill. You can see it's written in red. That has to do with magnetism in the worst sense, the Ken Wheeler sense. Well, don't worry about that. I'm a little half out of my mind because of the heat. I'm pouring sweat right now. The hawk, the train, the siren. There's going to be a helicopter soon if everything goes perfectly. There's the hawk. So I'm trying to make a really important point, because the hawk is screeching at the top of her lungs, because the universe knows what's going on. David Bohm was able to show that. We're getting there, but in order for you to actually see all this so it changes your life, you actually have to be, first of all, honest, which I know that you can't be, but you're listening to me, so that's a good start. But I'm out of energy. So I wish I could tell you the collapse of the wave function. Oh, I'm just kidding. I'm teasing you. What is the collapse of the wave function? Well, it's not a wave, which can't collapse. Although you could say a wave crashes on the shore on a lake. Doesn't it collapse? Not the way they say it does. What it means is you have a big old huge sphere because the photon is expanding to the limit of the universe. It's trying to hit the edge of the universe. That's what a photon is. Where does it get its speed? It's from the rotation of the universe in 2 proportion space. In 4 proportion space, you should say. I discovered 4 proportion space. Well, so did Albert Einstein. The Einstein field equation for its space-time, the basis of relativity, the basis of our current definition of gravity, is simply a 4-component number. But alas, it's a 3-1 split. That doesn't work. Einstein couldn't figure out. He wasn't wise enough to see you want a 2-2 split, not a 3-1 split. But if you start with 3D, which is what all scientists mistakenly do, it works up to a certain threshold, but when you get to reality, it no longer works because the extrinsic grid does not conform to closed space. It doesn't conform to intrinsic circular or spheric space because it's cubic in volume space and it's hypercubic in space-time. That doesn't work. So that's where you got the Big Bang from. That's psychotic for that reason. Because now you're saying that the universe exploded out of an impossible inverted negative null dot, which is simply superstition. That's not how the universe came into being. I can tell you in a nutshell how it came into being, replacing the Big Bang with a univex event, whereby the universe was simply infested with energy from superspace, which is where God lives. He lives in the space that you and I will never see, touch, feel, or know. Except I'll show you that it's real. That's called physical imaginary space. And that's what the photon traverses, which is why you can't see it. It's traveling through space, which is already invisible, but it's still a photon. It's still a coherent packet of energy. It's just that it's falling. But it's falling through what we would have to conceive as spheric space. It's actually hyperspheric, which is why when it arrives at your telescope, it doesn't collapse, because it's not a wave. It arrives as a particle, which is why it remembers the straight line distance back to where the source had been before relativity took over. Because as the photon is spiraling through hyperspace to get to your telescope, it's still a particle. You can't see it because it's falling through perpendicular space. And it doesn't know what time is. So it retains everything from the tempuscule at which it detached. So it remembers its position. So when it arrives, it informs you of its position when its source was where it was. But according to the Quranic principle of the falling places of the stars, which is in one of the surah of Muhammad's immortal book, the Quran, which was dictated by Gabriel the Archangelos, I know that's a lot of information, but you need to synthesize all of this instantly in your mind so that you can kickstart into the true universe and have supervision, which is what I'm attempting to teach you. I didn't say that at the outset because I have to trick you to see it, because your mind won't do it. No human mind has ever been able to do it, but I apparently was born tricked. So I just happened to see these things, although it took a lot of work. Don't think I was born with supervision. No. I'm not Ken Wheeler, honey. No. I'm not covered with tattoos. I don't typeset my books with lines that are 50 words long because I really unconsciously don't want anyone to understand me. I just want your money. That's Ken Wheeler. He's a beggar. He just wants your money. I tested him to see if he would take the bait of another real scientist. I think he's real. It's just nobody will ever understand him. And I tried to bring him out of his shell. He doesn't want to be brought out of his fucking shell. He wants money. And that's all he wants. So he's a shyster. And I don't respect him. I hate him. I think he stinks. But, I still have hope for his soul. Perhaps one day he'll go, hey, I saw your video, Scott, just yesterday on July the 12th, and boy, was I wrong to just push you away. Let's work together. Maybe we'll both make money, and maybe he'll suck my soul into the abyss that he's in. And I'll go, yeah, I need money. I can't even pay my bills at the end of the month. I'd love money. And there goes my soul. That's not going to happen. So fuck you, Ken Wheeler, wherever you are. I hope you're having fun in mosquito-ridden Key West. I'm wearing myself out, but I have infinite energy, just as the photon does. So what's the collapse of the wave function? There's no collapse, there's no wave, and there's no function. It's a particle that's falling and it hits your telescope. The photon retains all the information it had because it never stopped being a particle. It's just that it's a particle in actual hyperspace. It's hyperspheric space, which is rotating. So the universe does have a center. And I discovered it, and I can show you where that is mathematically and geometrically. It is a mind bender because, as you were taught in school, so was I, the center of the universe is everywhere. That's correct. The whole universe, which is finite, which I proved, is the center of hyperspheric space. So that center has a surface, and I proved that. That's the definition of the quantum. It's a spheric surface. And that's the proton. The proton is the smallest spheric surface. And there's nothing inside the proton except an invert form of energy that's in the perpendicular universe and locked there. So one of the edges of the universe is inside every single proton. And the other edge of the universe is the integral of all of those centers, which is the edge of finite space. That's been proved by the discovery of light frequency, which has a lower number called 2 and an upper number, which I finally defined, which is not the inverse of the multiplication of the permittivity and permeability of free space, which is the involute linear derivative answer which cannot be understood, but that's in Wikipedia, and that's the definition of the upper limit of the frequency of light. In other words, it's the inverse of the Planck length, which is essentially 10 to the 43rd power, either negative or positive. It depends on if you're looking through the short end of the telescope or the long end of the telescope. The problem with that definition, which is logical enough in linear formulation, is that it's derivative, so it's not true. It's limited to the human perceptual system, which is locked to an extrinsic grid, which Einstein used, which is a mistake. You need the sphere inside hyperspheric space, because then you can define the rotation of the universe, which takes the place of the expansion of the universe. It's anti-physical to say the universe is expanding. So all of your physicists are psychotic. That's simply tautological. They're literally out of their minds, but they don't think that they're out of their minds, and they can actually prove that they're not. But what you end up with is just a bunch of stuff that it doesn't make sense, such as the universe is expanding, which is the current cosmological model. In order for there to be a Big Bang, there has to be expansion of space. Well, it is thought that that was discovered with the discovery of the final rung on the cosmic distance ladder called the redshift relationship, which is a linear relationship. It's essentially relativity restated, but it's a misinterpretation of redshift. Because the redshift is thought to show that since a progressively more distant light source becomes progressively red, that's not strictly true, because there is such a thing as blue shift, so already they're wrong. They say that it's Doppler shift, which occurs in a medium. Well, in this case, it's not a medium like a lake or an atmosphere. It's the medium of free space. And that leads to all kinds of psychotic formulations which can't be understood by the mind of man, because it does not actually represent reality. And that's why you have nothing but paradoxes. Well, the collapse of the wave function is one of those paradoxes, so let me show you what really happens. The particle detaches from the electron system and goes into free fall. And the reason light has the speed of 300,000 kilometers per second is because that's the rotation rate of the finite universe in superspace. And superspace is, of course, where the energy injection came from, the fiat of God to create the universe. No man can possibly conceptualize that, because if you pretended to conceptualize that, you would put yourself in the place of God. So that will never be understood. That's the final mystery, is how the universe came into being. But at least I can tell you, in a certain imaginary space, how you can conceive how the universe came to be what it is. It's pure energy. And pure energy is not positional. Although you can say it's positional if you make the universe a position in hyperspheric space, which it is. It's essentially a proton in a universe so large that you would lose your mind if you saw it directly. So this is dangerous. So the collapse of the wave function is simply this. It's not a collapse. What is it? It's an arrival. So instead of a collapse, it's the arrival of the wave? No, it's the arrival of a particle. Is it a function? No, that's a mathematic concept. So it's the arrival of a hyperparticle. So you can translate the collapse of the wave function to the arrival of a hyperparticle, which, since it's in superspace, remains a particle, but it's in a higher dimension. So when it arrives, the collapse of the wave function is its instantaneous transition from hyperspace back to space, which it never left, because space is inside of hyperspace. So that's the full explanation, and now you know that the collapse of the wave function is simply the arrival of a hyperparticle, which naturally retains its frequency, although the frequency gets less. And why does it do that? It's because of centrifugal force. That the longer that the particle, the hyperparticle, is traveling, it's actually it's actually susceptible to Machian drag, which is very difficult to conceive because it is in superspace. We would think of it as a loss of energy, and that's how we measure it. That's why it turns red. It's losing energy, but it retains its information. So all the information is simply shifted so that the entire body of information loses energy on a continuum, which means that you don't lose information, it just gets dimmer. Well, we can magnify it back. That's what we do. That's what the James Webb Telescope is doing. It's capturing light after it's, as we would say, has lost energy, and you would have to say it that way. It actually has not lost information, though. There's a I'm not sure I fully understand Machian drag, but it's essentially if you're on the edge of a merry-go-round and it's spinning faster and faster, you tend to fly off the edge. That's called centrifugal force. It's the counterbalancing force to centripetal force, which is what in the universe? What pulls in the universe? Gravity. Well, what pushes out? Electromagnetism in free space. So that's the Noether balance of the two forces which Roger Boschkovich discovered at the atomic level before Bohr did. And he beat Bohr by more than a century. So that's a lot of information. That's an hour. Thank you for tuning in. I hope I blew your mind and undid your bind. That's the whole idea. We'll be getting to God, Muhammad, Jesus, and true religion, true supernaturality, because I discovered the space where God exists. So do the angels, so do the spirits. This will blow your mind even more. You may end up hating me. That's up to you. If you want to go to hell, you're perfectly entitled to do so. God doesn't want you to go to hell, but if you do, then you're more powerful than God, and you'll get your reward for that. Just as all the nations of Europe and America, and especially Israel, the false nation of false Jews who are nothing but liars and psychopaths, they're going to get theirs when they come up against the Lord God Almighty at Armageddon, at which time I predict that Jerusalem will be hit by a nuclear weapon. Because in Ezekiel, in the Valley of Dry Bones, those bones are radioactive. And it takes 7 years to collect those bones, and they're marked with signs. For collection, it takes 7 years to get rid of the radioactive bones of the Jews who are not Jews but do lie and are a synagogue of Satan. Stay tuned, we'll have more. Keep looking up. We'll be right back. I promise I'm not going to leave you. It's my commission before I die. I'll give you the information that either sends you to hell, or you're going to lose your mind and wake up on the other side as I did. And then you'll be free and you won't need these bastards around you listening to their shithole music and the liars that keep them distracted from reality to the death of their own souls. Maybe that won't be you. I would not bet on you ever. But maybe you're one of the elect. And that's the most I'm authorized to say at this time. Stay tuned, I'll be giving you the rundown as the world destroys itself. Thank you.